Okay, so just first to welcome everybody and thank you very much for joining all our presenters, all the colleagues who've been kind to agree to respond, and our participants, and also Imagining Futures guests. My name is Elena Saev. I have the pleasure of leading the team of Imagining Futures at Exeter University. And in this series, we present really work and ideas of the projects of Imagining Futures, which are running between 2020 and 2024. So together, what we're working towards is an egalitarian archival practices manifesto. And really, it's about concerning issues of who gets to decide what gets to be remembered into the future, and is also about the power of the archive as both process and object, and we understand archive in the broadest possible sense. Well, we should also say that we are funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So today, the format will be like in some of our other dialogues, which means we're going to have brief introductions of about 10 minutes by the presenters. Then we will have about 5-minute responses, and we will have hopefully 20 minutes for discussions. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hands. And if there's very bad connectivity, we might have to switch some of our videos off. So today we have the pleasure of hearing from Nurdan Çayırezmez, and her respondent will be Naomi Miller, and also Thomas Biginagwa, whose respondent will be Rafael Uchoa. And we begin with Nurdan's work, as well as her team at the British Institute at Ankara. And they will be talking about digitalizing Turkey's botanic heritage, archiving historical herbarium in Turkey. So I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to our presenters and also our respondents before we go forward. So Nurdan has been at the Digital Repository as a manager for the British Institute in Ankara since about 2018. And she's a Near Eastern archaeologist and currently pursuing a PhD at Ankara University on information and records management, as well as being an expert in GIS systems. Her experiences of synergy between classical methods of archaeology and information technologies have been very highly influential also in her other professional work in the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, where she coordinated the Museum National Inventory System and was also its project manager. And one of the people who's also here as part of the team is Necmi Eksoy, who's a professor in the Faculty of Forestry at the Karadeniz Technical University. And he's also the full professor of forestry and botany in the Department of Forest Botany at Duce University, as well as a curator of the Herbarium of Duce University and a director of Botanical Garden there as well. So thank you very much for doing this project with us. And responding to them will be Dr. Naomi Miller, who's based at the University of Pennsylvania, Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, and her work focuses on the environment and land use in the ancient West and Central Asia through the study of plant micro-remains. Through her interest in long-term vegetation change in Gordian in Turkey, she began work on preservation of biodiversity and archaeological sites through the passive and active management of native vegetation. And among her co-edited volumes are Sustainable Lifeways, Cultural Persistence in an Ever-Changing Environment with Moore and Ryan. And without further ado, I give it over to Nurdan.
Thank you very much. I will try to share my screen now. Did it work?
Yes, it did.
Okay, thank you very much. Dear IF team and the attendees, thank you very much for organizing this talk and listening to us. Oh. Okay, the BRA is a UK registered charity. registered charity that supports international renowned research and collaboration in Turkey and the Black Sea region. And we are dealing archaeology, ancient and modern history, climate and environmental science, heritage management, and social and political sciences. The institute founded in 1947, and it is one of 8 British international research institutes supported by British Academy. Herbariums are crucial. Herbariums are crucial for the preservation of biocultural collections and the dissemination of environmental study results to the researchers and public. This project allowed us to define a digitization process for BIA Herbarium and to facilitate open access to an endangered archive under preservation. This talk will present the historical herbarium from an archival perspective and examine the difficulties surrounding the digitization process and incorporation of linked open data. Today, I would like to give you information about our botanical reference collection, Flora of Turkey, and our digitization procedures and data creation process. Our herbarium was founded by Gordon Charles Hillman between 1970 and 1975, and throughout until 1990s, several researchers, David French, Robert Mark Nesbitt, Naomi Miller, George Wilcox, contributed to these collections by collecting new plants, identifying, preparing labels, mounting, and to preserve this unique and historical collection physically, as well as establishing a virtual herbarium which contains images and information on at-risk plant specimens in Turkey. We want to make it available to students, researchers, and to public. So the main important part of Turkey's biological heritage, and facilitate open and permanent access to these collections. Our herbarium code is BIA. And mainly herbarium, seeds, wood, and charcoal was used for the botanical reference collection in order to help archaeobotanists and ethnobotanists. Turkey has various macro, microclimates and vegetation types along, can you see now? Okay, Turkey has macro and micro, let me show it like this. Okay, macro and micro climatic regions, this Euro-Siberian, Mediterranean, Irano-Turk Canyon, due to its diverse topography. These different ecological conditions make Turkey a hotspot for biological diversity and allow for a wide range of endemic plants to grow. So you can see in this map. So in this eastern regions and the Mediterranean coast has much more endemic species in Turkey. Herbarium specimens are unique data. Each of them represent a biological record at a single place and time that cannot be obtained by any other way. These kind of collection-based experiences lead to an increased understanding of the living world. Biological diversity and changes are directly tracked through specimens in herbarium, regardless of whether these changes are ancient or recent. Turkey has 10,000 specimens, different types of specimens, and 3,000 of them are endemic and unique to this country. The why biocultural collections are important for all of us, because it's give you a base for scientific research. Also, you can use for applied research in order to understand the human societies. Also, you can use for national research management and development issues. And it is also important preservation and restitution of traditional knowledge. It helps you to preserve the plants in ex situ way, like the convention of biological diversity implies that in situ and ex situ preservation is important for future generations also. We can use biocultural collections for education, training, and community service projects. This project, BIA Herbarium Digitization Project, is want to preserve and increase the accessibility of 4,500 herbarium specimens by mounting them on acid-free. So there was a process from analog to digital. So we took the photographs and digitally linking them to other national and international collections will be the big goal for the project. In addition, the plant themselves, archive contains the handwritten notes of original collectors, which provide invaluable data on the date, location, habitat, and conditions in which material was collected. This digitizing and collecting this data and combining it with high-resolution images of individual specimens, we intended to create open access digital herbarium, so it will be available to public. This value, such digital resources, has come sharply into focus, as you know, from during the pandemic, when physical access to collections has been limited. And this will be the important teaching and research tool for country and the region. In order to ensure the quality and accessibility of the data, international standards were adopted in terms of metadata and vocabulary. As there is currently no coordinated initiative in this area in Turkey, an important legacy of this project will be development and sharing of model archival practices for historical herbarium collections within Turkey. And end of the project, we are going to organize a workshop in order to share our experiences. So we made an assessment in the beginning of the project and checked the previous records. The specimens were kept in folded newspapers. These were stored in the herbarium and organized by cabinet and shelf numbers. The specimens were taken out from the newspapers, cleaned and mounted on acid-free archival paper. They were too dry to be mounted because in 1970s, in 1990s, there were people to work on it, but after that, nobody worked on that. So they were too dry to be mounted properly, so they had to go through air restoration and conservation process. A small part of the specimens were already mounted during the 1970s, 1990s period. So the mounting procedure during this project was established based on the techniques our team observed on these previously mounted sheets. Certain specimens were either misidentified or not identified at all. We used Flora of Turkey as the main source of literature in order to identify these specimens. Some specimen IDs were already recorded on old labels and handwritten notes. These are old plants, old labels. These were digitized and printed version was added on the archival papers. The label format was created the project members from scratch, this one. Old labels were kept as archival sources and mounted on the new acid-free sheets. So we tried to keep old archival records as much as possible and make it more historical. If there is no label, new labels were created and pasted on the sheets. A herbarium database was created and all the information, including handwritten notes, were digitized and recorded onto this database. Each specimen was assigned a barcode matching the specimen number on the database. The main difficulty we faced during this phase of the project was deciphering the handwritten notes from old notebooks. During the labeling barcoding phases, new metadata headings, new metadata headings and vocabularies created. All the herbarium specimens are photographed by professional photographer and images are transferred to an offline database. So it is ready to be uploaded to digital repository after data creation process. In this picture, you'll see the before and after photos. We cleaned and mounted the specimen as shown in the pictures. These are the previously mounted specimens. We cleaned them and then transform into the new sheets sometime. Creating a workflow for digitization phase of the project was one of the most challenging stages. Simply the locality and plant description and habitat notes mostly obtained from handwritten notes belonging to the collectors. We are first preserved an Excel file and then transferred the data to the database. This linked open data stage of digitization has not been sufficiently practiced in Turkey before. We have 10 herbaria, which is virtual now in Turkey. So the BIA will be one of them. So data verification, digitization processes are important. Our digital repository will be an important part of the open access repositories, including biocultural collections for archaeobotanists and ethnobotanists. Data control and ingestion processes are currently ongoing. We are planning to open our repository as soon as possible. Data creation is another time-consuming task as it involves the final verification of data and images for digital repository ingestion. Here you can see one example with all the headings. So this is in the handwritten notes, these are the headings, so we managed as metadata headings. So these are the information we are linking to controlled vocabularies in archival practice. So the person data and the local area, ancient sites, cities and districts are linking to the authority records in archival manner. And the other important task was to link the biological terms for plants. So the Thymus hashkineti velan example, as you see here, the main aim was to link these terms to the authority files. So we used GBIF, POVO, and other authorities. Also, in this example, the GCRF International Portal of Biological Collections, giving two examples from Turkey, south eastern part of the Turkey. But we have this specimen in our herbarium, so which is endemic in Turkey. So when we try to open our database online, after that it will be possible to link our data with international aggregators and portals. So digitization made us create the statistical analysis like this. So these charts information that the locality of the plants collected from all over Turkey, however, mostly from BIA-funded rescue excavation projects. On the next slide, you will see the information on a map. For example, the Gordion project donated material from Naomi Miller was 20% of our collection. So thanks to Naomi, she's with us today. So and now she can explain the archaeobotanical use of herbarium. So on this map, you will see the two big sites here, the Ashwan and Tilorik, which is under dam now. So these BIA projects was rescue projects. So this herbarium and this plant collection is important because it is not possible to access those regions now due to security concerns and certain sites being permanently flooded as a result of hydroelectric dam projects. In this regard, this unique collection is irreplaceable resource for understanding Turkey's botanical past. So it is international importance indicated by its inclusion on registers such as Index Herbarium. So in addition to this, as I mentioned before, we have endemic types of specimens in the herbarium. So, and then we have different types of plants that help researchers for archaeobotanical studies. Circa 120 different families in BI herbarium, because especially the collectors collected different plants in order to make a better reference collection for future studies. Historical herbariums are an important part of cultural heritage, archival practice, and digitization of small herbarium has challenges. It was a team effort with experts, interns, and volunteers. Thanks to all of them, we can make archive available online soon. As an archival perspective, it is important to share the know-how that is related to practical workflow, and it is important to save our time and efforts because in the academic language, as you know, all the metadata vocabularies are important, because when you apply to archive digitization process, it is getting difficult. So we are happy to share our experience for data creation in terms of small herbarium digitization. So biocultural collections are important for research and preserve the biodiversity. We tried to preserve the endangered historical herbarium within this project. We also reached volunteers, interns, so they also gained expertise about archiving herbarium. We are going to organize local workshop to disseminate our results in terms of historical herbarium conservation practice. Digital repository will enable us to share our collections to wider regions and more researchers. So we were lucky to have other big online herbarium resources like UKRI and GCRF, and we used their documents, knowledge from their websites. Also in Turkey, we used some databases to find the Turkish plant names and links. So our herbarium were used Davis Flora of Turkey book as a reference to identify the plants. Thank you very much for your attention. So happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Nurdan. That was wonderful. And also your last slides just make it clear just how much goes into creating something like this. I mean, it's a tremendous number of people and expertise. So that was incredible to hear, but I won't say anything else, and I will be handing over now to Naomi for the first response.
Well, not only was it a great presentation, but even more important, it's an even better project. And it's hard to express how important this kind of work is, both within Turkey and also internationally. So a lot of the, since I'm an archaeologist, I'll just start with, and that's why I was specifically asked as an archaeologist, and to respond to why this herbarium in particular, herbaria in general, that archives, these kinds of biological archives are so important. For anybody out there who's not an archaeologist, just accept that plant remains are findable on archaeological sites. A lot of times they come in, they're charred so that they're burnt in the absence of oxygen. We all know about dry plants like from the pyramids. Sometimes they're waterlogged, sometimes they're mineralized. But the point is that you can get seeds, wood, and other kinds of plant parts. And in order to identify those plant parts so that you can begin to reconstruct ancient environment, land use, and human diet, animal diet, you really need to have a good reference collection. And that's what a herbarium helps you, helps solve that problem. So, but before you have a herbarium, you have to go out and collect the plants. And so like what I was doing at Gordian, for example, was documenting the present day vegetation, and so that I could use that as a baseline to understand the archaeological materials. Because you only understand, archaeology, we understand things in terms of the present when you're trying to sort of reconstruct the past. It's also important, like I grew up in New York City, and I'm not from the Middle East, and I'm not from a rural place. So just going around and collecting plants and learning about the different plants really helps me understand the local ecology of the area, the present day ecology. Again, that's a base that gives me a baseline for trying to understand the past. The final thing is you want that material to help you physically identify the ancient material. So because the plants that you're looking at as an archaeobotanist are all dead, and they've been dead for a long time, all you have to go on really is the morphology. So especially with a charred plant, there's no or virtually no DNA. You can't look at color. You can't smell the cedar wood. It's really what you've got is shape and plant anatomy. And so having that collection helps you document that your ancient seeds, your ancient wood, and the ancient plant parts. Another aspect in terms of the historical archive for archaeological understanding, because I have gone to Gordian, not quite every, well, forget COVID, but before COVID, I came to and worked at Gordian for almost every year for over 20 years. And because of the suburbanization and agricultural development, there are plants that were already relatively locally rare. They may not be rare in the world, but they don't grow around Gordian very much. And then some of them I only saw in one place. That place then became a house or became a field instead of a garden. And there's so much, even in 25 or 30 years, there were changes in plant cover at the site. So, I mean, so the bottom line is document the present vegetation, document present ecology as a way to understanding the past, and to provide what are called voucher specimens, so that will help you identify your archaeological materials. So that's maybe reverse order of importance for archaeology, but still very important.
Thanks very much, Naomi, for that. I wondered if within that, coming from that really specific expertise that you've got as an archaeobotanist, and maybe tying into the fact that a couple of times Nurdan mentioned models and taxonomies and creating new ways of doing things. Maybe before we turn to Nurdan and Nechmi who are in the room, maybe just to say how important is what's happening now in this project in connection to kind of the more kind of global ways of thinking about taxonomies and models for this kind of work?
Well, taxonomy is underappreciated by most life scientists, and the money goes to other, like to look, to bioprospecting for medicines and stuff like that. But the thing about taxonomy is if you don't know what a plant is, then you can't share information. And since Linnaeus and since the systematization of botanical knowledge, which is encoded in the archive that are herbaria, and at this point, completely international, at least one of the few, even though individual taxonomists might disagree about what you're going to call a particular plant, at least everybody knows it's that plant. And so the plant taxonomy is one of, for understanding, if we want to talk about sustainability, biodiversity, climate change, for all of those things, if you don't have a deep understanding of plants and plant taxonomy, it becomes very difficult to understand and to compare over different world areas, for example, ecology, changes in environment, that kind of thing. I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks very much, Naomi. That takes us into a whole other world about taxonomies, which is so important to imagining futures more big, but I don't want to get into that until we talk a little bit more about this. So Nurdan or Netri, anybody else who has questions? I mean, I don't know if you wanted to respond to that, what I was asking of Naomi first.
I would like, I'm so excited because to meet Naomi Miller, it's because we determined and tried to her collections. She worked very sensitively, and then she write her notes is a very unique, and it's explaining. So this be a collection in the future will be a reflect of the entire and included of the more taxonomic and floristic knowledge to Turkish flora, because of at the moment many historical ruins is under the dam, and then we have no data about which plants is distribution in this area. At the moment, we rewrite of the Turkish flora. So BIA collections is a treasure of the for the taxonomist. So many people is focused on, because my colleagues is Nurdan, Deniz, and Barış. For example, we cited of the additional flora, which monumental flora of the Davis, volume 11. We cite of the many gramineae, Magnus collected and cited. So I think that also, you know that Turkey has a huge flora, is a land bridge from Europe and Asia. But we had not enough virtual flora and virtual herbarium, so that many our data collections is deposit of the herbarium and national collections. So virtual herbarium is reflected and information, and many collectors is focused on, and they will be tried to identification on the digitalized. So after that, BIA and this treasure, I call it treasure, because if it's not possible to go to the under the Frat Keban Dam, so is this very first big project. So I think that it will be cited, and it will be more useful and help to taxonomical and as I told before, and floristic knowledge in the Turkish flora. Many young scientists will be visited of this site, and after cited of the rewriting of the illustrated flora of the Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I see Zafer. I'm sorry, I don't know if your name is Zafer, but you're very welcome.
My name is Füsun Ertuğ.
Okay.
I'm very thankful, really, to Nurdan's presentation, and also Naomi, to see everyone here, including Necmi. I will also point out another important aspect of this collection, particularly. it was collected by archaeobotanists mostly. And what archaeobotanists and ethnobotanists collect and botanists collect are totally different. Usually, archaeobotanists collect mostly gramineae, for example, with seeds, etc., and they collect in a different way. I'm also, as an archaeologist and ethnobotanist, collect in a different way than botanists. And particularly important is Gordon Hillman's collection, of course, in this. I also studied when I'm doing my PhD. I stayed at the Institute and studied Gordon and Mark Nesbitt's collections. But Ashwan, Nurdan says, Ashwan project is about 62% of this collection, and Naomi's Gordian project is something like 20%, I guess. When you look to this kind of collection, you see the whole environment. While when you go to an ordinary herbarium and check someone's collection, it's all over Turkey, not one area. Because we work in excavations, we want to create a reference collection. We try to collect all the daily plants, all the plants that people use. That's what I'm collecting. And also lots of gramineae, for example, all the seeded. And we collect when it's in the edible position, edible stage, sorry, and with flowering and with seeded, so that it's not a collection of only when you are passing through. So it's particularly thought and represent the whole vegetation of the area as much as, of course, we can. That's why it's very important to have these kind of collections collected by ethnobotanists and archaeobotanists, because they create a local reference collection. That makes a big difference than botanist studies, because they are searching for a specific family or endemics, particularly, isn't it, Nejmi? Or a forestry herbarium, or totally different. And we all have to have local reference collections so that this institute's collection is particularly important. That's what I want to focus on. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much for highlighting that. And I see that Zuhura had a hand up, but I think she might need to come back. But in the meantime, Nurdan, did you want to respond to that or add anything?
I think why it is important, as Füsun and Naomi mentioned, that the archaeobotanist has different angle to while they started to archive this collection in the beginning. And then I think Stefan is with us now, and then he is one of the pioneers to collect specimens from the Ashwan, botany samples from the Ashwan site, which was a rescue project. So they had a idea to collect archaeological botany samples, and then to find a reference to identify and understand the past. So it is important for the region because it is under them now, and it was important because some of the plants maybe it's not there still. So I'm not an archaeobotanist, I'm not a botanist, but I learned a lot from this project. Taxonomy is important, vocabularies and terms. I believe that this is important for photographic collection, and it is important for botanical collection. It is important for archaeological collection, because we want to find something from the digital collections, digital archives. So how are we going to deal and find the better terminology in order to find our resources from collections is one thing for my side, but also how are we going to keep and preserve these physical collections and digital collections for future generations, since it is endemic, and if we don't keep both physically and digitally, so it will be not findable in 5 years' time and 10 years' time. So it is also important to keep our traditional knowledge and archival knowledge and everything I can say.
Thanks, Nurdan. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I know some of you are working from very different perspectives when it comes to taxonomy and traditional knowledges and other kinds of things, and also different materials. Yeah, Naomi, yeah, and then Raphael, yeah.
Just what Fusun pointed out, which is the way archaeobotanists collect plants. We also we tend to collect common things that you see all the time, because that's what you find archaeologically. So what's interesting to us is not the rare thing, but the usual thing. Also we are much more likely to collect crop plants, which a lot of botanists, they're interested in the wild orchid, and they don't really care so much about sort of the local, melon or onion. And then the advantage of having these digital collections is it helps preserve the physical specimen, because there are some things you have to have the physical specimen. You really have to get there and to really look at something or to take a sample of something. But with I've looked at when I'm trying to identify plants, man, having online herbaria is great. So.
Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, absolutely. And Raphael, and then Stephen.
Yes, thank you so much for this. It's just a short question to our curiosity. Are all the essicates and all the plants and these herbarium come just from Turkey? There's nothing else from other parts of Europe of the globe, just Turkey? That's one question. And the other question is that if there are other materials in this herbarium besides the essicates and the pressed plants, like letters, books, or the materials that eventually belonged to John Gaston and other people who are involved in the process of creation of the herbarium. Thank you.
Yeah, we have very minor specimens from Iraq, Iran, because they were traveling in southeastern region, and they collected very few specimens from Iraq area. But we don't have specimen from other regions. And then next question, yeah, we are creating a digital repository not only for a herbarium. So it is a bit different than the normal herbarium, digital herbariums. We are digitizing the handwritten notes, we are digitizing the photography collection, and during the Tillahöyük study, for example, excavation, they recorded a lot of ethnographic photos. So how are they going to make bread? How are they going to crop the fields, and then etc., etc. So we have some photos from ethnographical perspective. So we are digitizing those ones. It will be available. So the whole idea is to link the documents with the digital record. And then so if there is photo for the region or landscape photo or the ethnographical photo related to this archive will be linked in the archive. So you will have a better knowledge about the process. So you will have a project documentation, project notes, etc., and archaeological results, and then the photography archive, and then the herbarium, and then wood specimens, and charcoal specimens, etc. So this whole idea is to create linked open data in the collections, between the collections, and also link them to other authorities in terms of taxonomies.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Nurdan. Stephen?
Nurdan, thank you so much for that presentation, and the others for the comments. I thought I should say something because I was actually present when the collection was being made in 1970 to 72. I'm not an archaeobotanist or a botanist at all, but I think one important point to make was that this collection of plants, and both the modern collection and the ancient seeds, became a real focal point for a whole project and enthused people and made us see our landscapes with different eyes. We were taught by our botanists to see things and appreciate things that we wouldn't have done otherwise. And so that the capacity of this subject to engage a lot of people was really important for a scientific project, but it was also a sort of binding mechanism between us, European students and scientists or whatever, and the very traditional village where we were working, because of course all these plants were well known, or most of them were well known to the villagers who knew their usages. They knew how to deal with them. So you had, the men who would harvest fields or remove, sort of know which weed plants to avoid or to remove from a crop, and then actually sorting out the grains. The women in the village were well used to that as part of their daily lives. They'd harvest a crop, it would be threshed and stored, and then they'd have to sort all the seeds before they turned it into flour so as to get the weeds out, which was exactly what our Gordon Hillman and his team who were doing that required of them with the charred charcoal remains, which we were obtaining from the excavation. So there was this extraordinary connection really between, as it were, a scientific project and the life and the activities that were going on in this village, which gave a real sort of context to the whole undertaking of doing botany or archaeobotany on the spot, which was, at least for me as a sort of observer, was really sort of life enhancing, really. It gave you a completely new dimension on the experience. And I don't know, that's very difficult to encapsulate in an archive 60 years later or 50 years later. But maybe one can somehow use an archive not just as a dry record, literally, but also as a way of bringing the subject to life for anybody who connects to it.
Thank you for that, Stephen. I mean, making archives dynamic is one of the aims of the Imagining Futures project. So we don't have an answer yet, but hopefully collectively we will. But I wonder if anybody wanted to come in on that, and maybe for the last kind of couple of comments or questions before we move it on to our next speaker, which actually directly addresses some of the issues that you've just raised and some of the conversations. I don't know if anybody has actually, I'm just wondering from Stephen, from what you said at the end, I don't know if those of you working with some of these archives and who are working with notes, is there a way that that's encapsulated? I mean, Linnaeus was mentioned, and obviously his whole diary is around partly that collection and all the stories that go around that and what it takes to put that in. He had a very different aim in mind, but I'm just wondering how we would do that in a modern archive.
I mean, we do have quite detailed field notes taken by the botanists on the spot, who would have sort of diaries and notes of the days they were collecting and the plants they collected and the date and the place and the time of year and so forth, which when I look at those, I mean, I haven't seen them all in detail, but, you know, of course, it takes you straight back to, yeah, no, I know that riverbank. I know that, that I can remember that area dimly in my, so those notes are not just a sort of scientific record, but they're a sort of evocation of a context in which the information was gathered. And just as well, you yourself, Lena, went on a sort of trek in the footsteps of Linnaeus not so long ago. And that must be partly to try and sort of re-evoke the experience of a discovery in the first stages, in the sort of the birth of all these scientific disciplines. And I think all those experiences are fantastically important. We mustn't sort of just consign this to a sort of a library or a digital archive or something. It has to speak to people, and I think botany is more eloquent in speaking to people than many other subjects.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Just to comment that the project that Stephen mentioned is actually something led by Stefan Müller-Wille, who's also at Cambridge and is also working with Raphael. And I'll stick a website link into that. But one of the things that we're really interested in and why we're retracking rather than retracing the footsteps is precisely to understand the context, even as you were saying, but also very much to expose the number of other people and knowledges, which you've already pointed to in terms of locally. And I know Raphael's also working on that are behind this. And Tom Biginagwa's next presentation with his team is very much to do with that. So it's kind of coming from the other end, which is exposing that knowledge. So I just before we move on to that, I don't know, Nurdan and Najmi, if you have any final comments to say about this, and then we'll.
Thank you for listening us and questions. And one more thing, our botanists are here, Ilgun and Barış, who worked hard during the project. They had an experience about reading those notebooks. How are we going to read this Gordon Hillman's handwritten notes, and how are we going to make context and understand these notebooks? It is another part of the project, and some of them, sometimes you have difficulties to understand this context and make this relation between other collections or in the collection. So it is important to understand the handwritten notes and old documents and notebooks. So, and then it will be available also with this project, so you can go and check the notebooks and then their history.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I know this is a work in progress, and they've also worked incredibly fast to get it even this far. So thank you so much for that. And just a final thank you to the respondents so far, and for all your discussion. Some of the students are also here who are students from particularly Dar es Salaam and Tanzania, but a couple of them have dropped out because they couldn't actually, something happened to their link, but maybe they'll come back later and ask the questions. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our next presenters, and I'll just do a very quick introduction. So the next presenter is going to be Thomas Bigenagwa, and he will be presenting on archiving the endangered traditional herbal medicinal knowledge and practices among multi-ethnic groups in Songea district in southern Tanzania. Thomas is Dr. Bigenagwa, who's a historical archaeologist and heritage expert based at the University of Dar es Salaam. His research interests lie in historical ecology, exploring human environmental interactions for the last 2 millennia, and his teaching also incorporates traditional healthcare and healing strategies. In particular, his research focuses on understanding how contemporary landscapes, habitats, and cultures were shaped by changing human environmental interactions after the incorporation of East Africa into the North Atlantic trade system after 1500. And this also includes devising conservation strategies and sustainable use of colonial heritage assets in Tanzania. And he's had projects funded by the Gerda Henkel, Volkswagen Foundations, and National Geographic Society. And responding to him will be Raphael Uchoa, who is a historian of science, working on links between natural history, race, anthropology, and ethnosciences. He's currently a junior research fellow at Darwin College at the University of Cambridge, and his research historicizes the geopolitical and epistemological transit of botanical and ethnographical materials from the Amazon basin to Europe between the 19th and 20th centuries. And he's one of the conveners of the research group Science and Its Others, histories of ethnoscience. So thank you very much for joining, and I will hand over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Elena, and hi everybody once again. I'm happy that you gave us this opportunity to present our work, and we are happy that we have these participants who follow this talk tonight. Yes, our project archiving the endangered traditional herbal medicine knowledge and practices in Songea district, Southern Tanzania. I am leading this project, and together with me is Sinyati Robinson Mark, an archaeobotanist based at the University of Dar es Salaam, is myself. And the third person is Richard Chale, who is a retired officer based in Songea district, where this research is taking place. Yes, I should also thank Imagining Future for giving this, for funding this project, that we have been able to do it very, very well, but also we extend our thanks to the University of Dar es Salaam for giving us time to work on the project. And on this slide, I think you can all see it. We really thank these herbal plants for saving the lives of many Tanzanians, about 65% of the population living in the rural areas. Yes, as a background, I should start by stating that World Health Organization reports that over 80% of Africans depend on traditional medicine to cure various diseases and illness. And this overdependence is due to several factors, including the locally proven efficacy of herbal medicine to cure various diseases and illness, inability of most Africans to afford the Western medications, but also inadequate health facilities and the practitioners, especially in rural areas where, for the case of Tanzania, over 65% of the population resides. We also have another factor, which is the perceived danger of toxic side effect of modern medicine. So there is this over reliance, and we see, and actually from our project, we see this will continue. The population in rural areas will continue to rely on herbal medicine to address the health challenges. However, despite its rising prominence, the herbal medicinal sector in Tanzania is in danger. It's in danger due to several factors. Some are historical and some are contemporary or current. Historical factors relate to strong opposition by colonial administration against the traditional healthcare practices. And the reason behind it is that traditional medicine was linked with the political and religious superiority of the local leaders, who in most cases were traditional healers. And because of that, the colonial administration did not take serious initiatives to archive, to document these practices for the current generation to appreciate and use. So this is a historical factor. But current threat that herbal medicinal plant is facing include land use changes we currently observe in the region, especially leading to deforestation. So we have massive investment happening in Tanzania, as for several other countries in Africa, where we have things like the agro-business, companies, international companies buying huge, massive tract of land and turning into farm to produce various goods. But also, we have expansion of human settlement due to population increases. But along with that, another challenge is the limited transmission of the herbal medicinal knowledge from the elders to youth, and partly because of this we call modernization. So we designed this project within the framework within the research framework of Imagining Future to archive the endangered science of traditional herbal medicinal knowledge and the practices in southern Tanzania.
Are you able to move it, or did you want me to put up the slides from here?
Yeah, this was what I'm trying to.
If you go onto the screen and press the arrow, that's it. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So this is our research area in Tanzania, and Tanzania is one of the countries in Eastern Africa. As you can see the red on the African map on top right, and our research area specifically is southern Tanzania, again in red, specifically in Songea district, and we confined ourselves in Maposeni world. So the reasons why we chose southern Tanzania, Ruvuma region in particular for this research is due to the fact that the region is experiencing massive deforestation of natural forest due to factors I've mentioned earlier, investment in commercial farming, but also population settlement expansion. But historically, Ruvuma region experienced the strong presence of colonial administration. For those who have read some little bit of history, you remember the Maji and the German colonial. This was one of the main bases of the German colonial administration. But also missionaries in the very world we are working on, we have the strong presence of the Benedictine missionaries, again, with the religious factors who were probably not happy to see the traditional medicine practices because some were linked with the paganism and those kinds of devilish thinking. But also, Songea district in particular, we have the multi-ethnic groups sharing various cultural practices, including herbal, medicinal knowledge and the practices. Some of you have, if you have read some history about this particular region, we have the Ngoni who migrated from southern Tanzania, southern Africa, and this is one of the destination point. And because of the military superiority over other ethnic groups, their knowledge in terms of medicines and whatever kind of ethnic groups that are residing in this region, they call themselves as Ngoni, but yes, we know they are in different ethnic groups there. But the point we are making here is that you have multi-ethnic groups that due to historical factors, they are sharing lots of cultural practices. So we chose this particular area anticipating to have, or rather gain expansive knowledge on this topic. So one of our research objectives was to document various diseases commonly known among the local people in our research area, those diseases that are traditionally cured using plant-based medicine. So we had to contact elders as entry point who informed us about people who they know, or herbalists who are knowledgeable about these particular practices. And in the end, we had an opportunity to interview and discuss with the 5 herbalists. As you can see, different events, different scenes on the screens. We interviewed and recorded them. Actually, all of them consented our recording and all those kind of not taking. But importantly is that these traditional herbalists, they described to us various diseases that they know and they cure, including telling us the local names, that's very important, Swahili names, causes of the disease, and if those diseases are transmissible or not, symptoms of the diseases, and the vulnerable age groups, telling us the seasonality, if anywhere, when a particular disease is happening, and the causes, but also side effects among several other information that we collected from them. But another task or objectives was to document medicinal plant species that they use to make herbal remedies for curing the diseases that they mentioned to us. So they described to us what plants do they use, which parts of the plants do they use, how do they correct these plant species. And as you can see, we had the opportunity to visit in the forest to identify these plant species. And while there, they described it to us, how do they take the medicinal part of it, whether it be a bulk or leaves, roots or seeds. So we had this opportunity to again, to listen to them, how do they take it, and this associated with the loss of taboos and the strict cultural beliefs. So while undertaking this ethnobotanical survey, we also we took some samples for two purposes. One, to use some of the samples to demonstrate, actually, for the herbalists to demonstrate to us how they prepare the remedies, as we are going to see in a short moment. But also, some of the samples we took was for herbarium identification of the tree species, so that we can know the scientific name of this plant species that we were informed about. Now, this is how we also learned from them and documented the preparation and the administration of the herbal remedies, where practitioners demonstrated how they prepare and administer some of the herbal medicine, because we documented of 35 plants that cures about 42 diseases. So we could not do for everyone, but we managed to have a demonstration of 6 of them, which is quite interesting, and we recorded them every event, as you can see. So the preparation that we recorded includes some herbal medicines are prepared by grinding the ingredients or the portions of the plant. Some are being dried, some are pounded, some are boiled, some are soaked into water, or a combination of the processes. It depends on which plant. And this is to demonstrate some of the diseases and illnesses that we learned from the herbalists in the area, but also the plant species that we were shown and recorded in terms of scientific name, but also local names. As I've said, we recorded 42 diseases and illness, and about 32 different plant species, both in local and scientific names. And this is a list probably you will have time to go through, because this is being recorded and deposited in the IF website. Again, we attempted to document the spatial distribution of the herbal medicinal plants and the land uses. And this is to show you some of the human-induced dangers to the plants, including expansion of cultivated lands, but also clearing of the forest, use of trees for different activities, as you can see. But important is that how we did this is by taking the coordinates of every tree species, every plant species that the locals use, so that in the end of the day, we can come up with a map showing where different plant species are found. And we can start to learn what are the ecology, what are the soil, what are the landscape, attitude, or what kind of factors to see the spatial distribution of this alongside the land use in those particular areas, so that we can tell that these different plant species are jeopardized by a certain land use. So to finish up this presentation here, we have some of the key observations and way forward that we came up. Basically, we noted the continuing dependency on herbal remedies among the people in Songea district, and what we also learned is that the herbarists have great traditional ecological knowledge of the medicinal plants, because they can easily tell you where to find a particular plant species, what period, what time of the year these plant species are found, but even what are the dangers these plant species are facing, that we may be able to, probably this kind of knowledge may help us to think how to incorporate indigenous knowledge when we are planning for any measures to rescue these medicinal plant species. But importantly, we also noted that traditional medicine, and in particular, herbal medicine, is associated with taboos, beliefs, and rituals, broadly intangible. And for us, we think this is very important, and coming from the cultural heritage wing, we think this is where we should probably strengthen, because we have several researches taking place on herbal medicinal plants in Africa and Tanzania as well, but they forget this particular aspect: beliefs, rituals, taboos associated with traditional medicine in Africa. So this is what we observed. We also noted that there are challenges again. There is a massive disappearance of herbal medicinal plants, but also limited the transmission of the knowledge, as I stated in the background. And as a way forward, we think some of the strategies should be maybe to come up with the botanical garden, to mobilize the local communities at the village level, ward level, district levels, to think about having botanical gardens where these medicinal plant species can be cultivated and taken care to make sure that in case they are disappearing somewhere else, but we have this one-stopping center where the community will continue to benefit from this in terms of obtaining the plant species to make our herbal remedies. But also, we think a thorough documentation like what we have done should be encouraged. And to this end, we thank again, I imagine in future for funding this. But it's very important that documentation takes place, because the challenges are very, very, very strong. And in the near future, if we do not document this, probably the future generation will miss this kind of knowledge. And to conclude, we argue that herbal medicine is an important sector in Africa that is recognized and accepted by Africans. Since over 60% of people in Tanzania live in rural areas where conventional healthcare facilities is scarce. Investment in the continued development of traditional herbal medicine sector will therefore accelerate the realization of the universal health coverage, which is pledged in the global sustainable development goals number 3, and the so-called the universal health coverage. And the universal health coverage states that we should plan to ensure that all people have access to the needed health services of sufficient quality to be effective, while ensuring that the use of these services does not expose the user to financial hardship. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that wonderful presentation, and also for the connecting of these very different kinds of challenges, but also ways forward. That's also so incredibly important. So I won't ask any questions first. Raphael, if we go over to you and maybe just wait for Tom to stop sharing the presentation, that'd be great.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me to this event, Elena, and for the amazing opportunity to engage with this project. I'm really excited about this, and you know, I'm learning so much with it. So I think as a first some set of comments. So my first thought came from the reading of the outlines of the project, which is on the Imagining Futures website. It's a very nice summary of the problems, the methods, and of the expected results. And I'll try just to mix it with some new questions raised now during the talk. So yeah, I mean, in fact, to my mind, the aims and the objectives of the Imagining Future project and the project archiving the endangered traditional herbal medicine knowledge could not be more pressing and more timing. So as a historian, of course, the theme of archiving is fundamental in my own reflections. And so I try to pay attention to Amerindian voices that are submerged in archives, herbaria, and museums, and European writings on flora, fauna, and people of South America and the Amazon. So as you can see, my research is more focused on South America, and in particularly on the Amazon basin. But I think the themes that this project deals with are very similar in nature to the very questions I and other colleagues are investigating, particularly problems concerning the politics and epistemology of indexation of indigenous knowledge, bioprospection, and colonialism, right? So in a certain sense, based on the description of the project and on this talk, these themes, like the politics and epistemology of indexation of indigenous knowledge, can allow us to raise some fundamental questions and comments, which are my starting point, let's say. So some basic questions which I think are important are, for example, what is indigenous knowledge, right? I think this is not an easy question. It's a fundamental question. It varies, but I think it takes us to the aspects of the conversation that Tom is raising about how to integrate indigenous conceptualizations of nature into our own research, right? So what is indigenous knowledge? How it is related to the so-called ethnobotany. And that's a very it seems to be a very straightforward question, but it is not. I am running with Professor Stefan Müller-Willer here at Cambridge, a group on the history of the ethnobotany. And I think there are many problems that we are kind of pinpointing about the difference between what people call indigenous knowledge and what emerged historically through many routes in the late 18th century and throughout the 19th century as something called economic botany at first, but then breaking down into small parts and eventually being called ethnobotany. So it was in many sense a colonial project, even though we don't associate that much the notion of ethnoscience as something that has colonial roots as well. So what are the differences between the two, indigenous knowledge as an object and ethnobotany as a Western construction? And in what ways can this debate on the difference between indigenous knowledge and modern science be expanded, especially in the epistemological scope of a project which is dedicated to archiving traditional knowledge? That is, let me be more explicit about this. It is implicit throughout the project that archiving is political, right? This is the broader scope of the broader project, and it, of course, as have been already discussed, it presupposes choices. So what is archived and what is not, who decides it, etc. And here we have a project which has a certain nature. It has a science. It is imbued with the authority of the science, right? So and I think one of the interesting points about this project, it's precisely because it explores the very possibility of discussing not only the politics of archiving, which it is part of the intention, but also the different indigenous concepts related to the very notions of disease, cures, and the use and the interpretation of plants, right? And even the organization of this material. So I could go even more in depth and ask not only about the elderly notions about cures and disease and their interpretation of plants, as it is already part of the project, but I would also ask how they conceptualize the archiving of their own material. Do they have any? Of course they do, but the question is in what sense? What is the epistemological basis for their own organization of this material in terms of the space, in terms of where to store or not to store, to throw it away or not throw it away, and what is the explanation for this managing and organization of the material? That's something that I think it's very interesting. This project has a great potential to talk to these questions as well. Besides, I think the project also makes me ask, in a broader sense, what is lost and what is gained from an epistemological point of view in the process of translating a plant or a set of plants that are rooted in a given cosmological tradition and its indexation in a different knowledge system, namely modern science, right? So I've just come back to, I got a print here very, very quickly on Tom's table of disease, medicinal plants, and medical plants names. So I wonder, for example, hiccup as a unit, you have the medical plants, which is Biophyton eleni, and then you have the local name. I wonder what can we learn from the epistemology of the local name of the units, how it is embedded in a certain cosmology that makes complicated actually this translation from the indigenous naming, because as you know, I mean, there's a whole tradition of scholar look into the way in which names are used in the indigenous context. So names points to cosmological explanations about the place of people and of plants, etc., etc., etc. Right. So I think that here this. Thank you, Elena. You just put it there, but I think there's many rich questions to be asked on this table that makes complicated this which in a way seems easy, just transposition from local name into a scientific name. I think there is a deeply philosophical, deeply epistemological problem in this transition from one place into the other, right? So I think these are some of the main kind of epistemic or epistemological question that I think this project really raises in a very interesting way. Perhaps as a final thought, I would also like to add the some thought on the archiving process, right? Both in the project and also on Tom's talk, the project seems to suggest that archiving as opposed to not archiving, right? Either by colonial powers or by post-colonial national policies. So it seems that in pre-colonial times, there was a more attention to the traditional knowledge, and in the colonial and post-colonial, you don't have you have just a dismissive attitude towards this. However, even though it has some I understand the argument, I'd like to expand it a bit. I'm very intrigued about the validity of such an opposition, and I ask if there would be the possibility of also exploring the colonial archives and herbariums, both to identify a more clear way, the colonial forms of archiving, and to also to raise other materials that are likely to be stored in the shelves of global north institutions and data sets, right? So I believe that looking into colonial biopiracy networks can also reveal broader archival histories with greater potential to also reveal hidden histories and make it more explicit, the colonial ordering of material and of knowledge, right? So I think I mean, to one of the findings that we have here by historicizing ethnoscience is precisely that even though, I mean, the argument is right, there is a dismissive attitude from naturalists, from Humboldt to Darwin to Calvin Martius, to Wallace and all others famous traveling naturalists, even from Linnaeus in the 18th century. Even there is a dismissive attitude. You also see some attention to the native knowledge, right? So the question is what can you learn from the fact that some of them are also looking into some part of the indigenous knowledge? But I think I have already reached my time. Thank you. And thank you very much for your attention. Yeah.
Thanks, Rafael. That was incredibly rich. And Tom, I think just there's so much in there. We could have a whole other hour that also links back to what Nurdan and Naomi and others were talking about before. But Tom, if we just, whatever you feel you want to respond to, you don't feel you have to respond to all of that, that'd be brilliant. And if others can jump in then after that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you very much, Rafael, for your comments, your observation. It's quite a lot. I think most of what you have said for me or for us, the eye-openers, that is how we should probably continuing investigating, exploring some of these issues. And I really like the way you have coined these kind of things. And especially, for instance, where do we set a clear demarcation that this is indigenous, this is local, and this is modern, in the concept or idea of archiving an archived voice, for this case practices. That is really hard to tell, but for this particular project, and I may say probably the first phase, because there are quite a lot of things to continue exploring, including some of the issues that you have raised. Indigenous or local epistemologies, this the names, following the names, but we just put them here in a scientific language or common English language for sharing, but for sure we need to go back and explore more about this. And for this case, for instance, for knowledge sharing, we had to have a medical doctor actually to translate what the description came out from the herbarists themselves. But we quite agree that we really needed to go back and find the meaning of these local names, of the diseases, of the plants themselves, and so on and so forth. I also like your comment on this idea of botanical garden. And then yes, we are proposing this because we do not have a way forward for now. And we think, are we now talking of the Western way of archiving a botanical garden, which is a colonial, a Western concept, so to speak? Or should we encourage individuals to have these different tree species in their homes? We are still scrutinizing, we are still brainstorming on how we should approach this and how does this concept fits in this imagining future, even though we may get in the future of expanding this project, we may get out of this circle to see what we can do for the sake of saving this. But within the imagining future, we are still wondering whether this concept will be right, or we will be also like cultivating the Western idea of having something in place, like the modern libraries we have today. You see, so we are thinking about those kind of issues. As you mentioned yourself, we may not have the easy and straightforward answers to some of the issues that you raised here, but for us is eye openers, or we may discuss with the colleagues to see what we should probably move forward. We are taking this comment on exploring the colonial herbarium to see how did they archive, what do they have, whether it be in Europe or in some centers in Africa. Of course, we have the challenges in doing this for Tanzania in particular. We have very good, nice archives, but accessing it is very, very difficult. For instance, in Peramiho, this is the Benedictine missions. If we had access to this, probably we could learn what do they have, what did they document about this. So it's not that they didn't want to hear. We are quite sure they also learned from the locals. They documented, but they didn't know what to share, or rather to take the feedback back to the community. And this reminds, actually, your comments reminds me, I was reading last night the writings, the report by English missionary who stationed in northern Tanzania, Usambara Mountains, by the name of Fala, writing back in 1878, telling the botanical richness of Western Usambara, and even convincing a botanist, and he used this term that to change the botanical wealth of this country into economy. This is telling that some of these explorers, missionaries, whoever journeyed in East Africa during colonial period did a great job to document this. But where do we get this? Is very, very challenging. But we are quite sure that they learned a lot, they documented a lot, but what they archived is not accessible. So it's another avenue where we should probably, I think, of expanding to see what we can get from the readings like this one I've mentioned. But for the Tanzania is really difficult. And that's why we have to go back to learn from the locals and document what they know. So for now, I think we may end responding to some of the issues you have raised, but I'm quite sure we can learn quite a lot from other colleagues, and we may also need time to follow up to see how we move forward with this project, exploring many of the issues that you have raised here. And as you have said, to complicate the project, and specifically from the cultural heritage perspectives, and within this framework of archiving the unarchived practices.
Okay. Tom, thank you very much for that. I mean, I have lots of my own comments, but I think, and I'm sure Raphael does as well, but perhaps we see first if anybody else who's been working on other aspects of this, so yes, go ahead, please. Thurzeng, if you want to go ahead. Professor, right.
Hi. Hi, thank you very much for this Tanzania presentation. I am wondering if you are checking other areas of Tanzania for this medicinal information, and is it possible to see, for example, other uses of the same plant or a similar plant in other areas of Tanzania with its local names or with its references? Is it, do you make a kind of database which you can reach out of your area?
Thank you very much for your questions. Yes, actually, we are doing this in southern Tanzania, and personally, I'm from northern Tanzania. We are talking of over 2,000 kilometers away. And this has been very interesting observation, because from my area, I know some of these herbal medicinal plants that we use in my area. And while undertaking this research, I was trying to compare what do they have. Yes, we have some species, plant species that we are sharing to treat some diseases and illness. And we have some plant species that are quite different from what, between the south and the north. And this is where, again, this idea of ecological knowledge is coming in, because if you have a disease X in northern Tanzania, Mara region is treated by plant X, and the same disease is treated by plant Y in southern Tanzania. This is quite interesting, and actually, our thinking is that we may need to take this project to other parts of the country to document this diversity. But again, it tells that locals are adopting to a particular environment, and for this case, different tree species, and that's where the ecological knowledge is coming in. It's a very nice observation.
Thank you.
Naomi, did you want to follow up with that?
Oh, I just want to say, well, it was a very interesting talk. I think the idea, botanical gardens and encouraging local people to continue their traditions are completely not antithetical, that you can have both. And I think, in fact, they would work better together, because I don't know about Tanzania, but I think that children generally are more interested in whether it's video games or in their own concerns, and they don't care so much about the knowledge of their elders. And a botanical garden might give a certain kind of respect to people who have that kind of knowledge. And it could, if it's started to support the knowledge, it's also going to support the people who have the knowledge just by its very nature. So I think having, and also it could serve as a resource. So if a person, for example, in their garden, 1 year they lost their plant, they could always go to the botanical garden to get it. So I think that the botanical garden idea is great for cultural heritage preservation and continuation, and especially if it has a education component for children. Anyway, but thanks.
Thank you very much. If I have to respond on that, thank you very much for your observation, Naomi. This idea came out actually from the locals themselves. That's a good thing. When we were recording, documenting this kind of practices, we learned that some actually are having some plant species in their homes. And you ask them, they tell you that because we have to keep these selected because these are disappearing. And it came out clear for us that this is probably a good idea, because some herbalists explained to us all those diseases, and they mentioned the plants, but going to the field to locate them, to find them, they tell you is impossible because we have to walk, let's say 20 kilometers from here or 30 kilometers from here. So this is why we thought that if they are doing this in their homes at the local small levels, maybe we can have something similar at the village level. And the good thing is that if this is going to take place, then the herbalists themselves probably should be doing this. They should take care of the botanical garden. And as we have said, this can be a living laboratory for them to teach the youth. And I'm quite sure this can easily happen in southern Tanzania, given that the level of dependence on herbal medicine is very, very high, and the locals are seeing these challenges. But important is that even the politicians have noted this, including the chief of the area, who is supporting this idea and is happy to start organizing the possibility of acquiring a piece of land for that. So the point we are making here is that if we get out of the boundaries of the imagining future, where we can see that probably the idea of botanical garden is going back to the Western thing, we may probably see impossible. We may find this is not a convincing way to go. But for the sake of rescuing these plant species, we think that this for now is something we cannot afford. So long as that these local herbalists are the one to be in charge of everything, are the one they know where these particular plant species can be obtained, how this plant species can be grown, how to take care of it, and so. So for us as academicians, probably is to show the way, but everything we leave it, and they know their languages to speak about the botanical garden. If it will mature, they know what are the taboos that they will put or associate with it so that it remains intact and continue to serve the community. So Naomi, thank you very much for seeing this as a good idea to continue pursuing.
Thanks, Tom. Javern, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Hope you all hear me. Yeah, first I would like to congratulate the presenter. And one of the things that I noticed from the presentation is that he uttered the issue of disappearing of the knowledge from which the knowledge of traditional medicinal would be passed down from generation to generation. And this is due to the wave of civilization as well as globalization. So from what I would like to suggest or to comment is on what Naomi has just raised on the issue of Botanical Garden, where in which that the Botanical Garden will provide a platform in which, because the local communities will be the one that will be the primary stakeholders. So with that case, that means it will provide the platform to which that the knowledge of this traditional herbal medicine and all the practices will be passed down from generation to generation, and thus will not lag behind this gap between the knowledge passing from one generation to another.
Thank you for this, Javar. And Tom, did you want to just respond to that? Or maybe before you do, maybe I can also add that having been fortunate to actually listen to the chief when you were presenting some of these ideas for the first time, I think, to a wider group of people and some of the locals, and Chief Zulugama, I think, was very interested in finding ways to do this. And later we went to the area of Songea, and other local people who have gardens of their own were also suggesting that perhaps they are also starting to collect precisely for the reasons that you're saying. So maybe there are ways, as Naomi was saying, of combining them in a way that you can build on some of these local gardens already. The question is then, in what way does the village get involved, and how does that link to plants that can't be transplanted from their ecological environments because they just wouldn't necessarily survive in a different, area? Do you have a dispersed kind of garden, maybe create a new idea of what a botanical garden is when it incorporates a village? And also then I remember us talking about what then is the role of something like the university. So Linnaeus has been mentioned a lot, and these kind of quote, scientific kind of gardens, and expropriation and colonial, I think, what was the word Raphael used? Piracy, I think, eco-piracy. So where, how do those things come in as well? And then maybe after your comment, Tom, depending on if there's any other questions, I don't know if Nurdan or Najmi or others want to come in as well, but I also want to give Raphael some chance to speak to some of these ideas.
Yeah, I can add something. Then I learned from this presentation that that we have in same danger because the human are disrupting and disturbing the plant resources, both in ancient times and nowadays. So we have to be careful about to preserve and archive these tangible and intangible plant information and knowledge. So we have to find a way to preserve and archive those practices and this plant information, where to grow, how to grow, etc., and how to make medicine from this plant, etc. And in the future, I think we will discuss more about how to archive those records, videos, and documents, and how to give information to our children. Yeah, thank you very much for a nice presentation.
Thanks, Nurdan. Tom, did you want to come in there? And Tom, can you just make a small footnote about what you told me, that hospitals actually have outlets for traditional medicines as part of that? I don't know if people here are aware of that, but it'd be great if you could comment on it.
Sorry, say it again.
You were mentioning that in Tanzania, hospitals also have outlets for traditional medicines, and maybe that would also kind of be brought into that in your answer to Nurdan.
Yeah, actually, start with what Nurdan said. I'm glad that she noticed that her project and us are facing the same situation, challenges to medicinal plants. Yes, just to assure or let the audience know that we intend to give back the feedback of this project team in terms of all the records we have made in terms of easy to read pamphlets or brochures And this actually was agreement with them because they do not have this technology of documenting, of archiving. So this is some of the outputs that we intend to take back to the community. And they are very, very happy with this idea actually, and it was one of the factors that made them accept that we record them is part of the terms and conditions they gave us, that you are recording us, we are telling you, but in the end you will have to give us this. And is it actually even the written consent that we agreed. And about the botanical gardens and with this different varied environment in villages, that is what we probably need to research, because as you are saying, it's not all about, okay, we have a land here, let's plant everything here. Some will not. We need to engage the locals to tell us what is available, what they can do. But at least at the village or at the ward level, you accommodate various different environments. Plain landscape, gorges, rivers, hills, and at least in that kind of situation, we may be able to accommodate some of this. And I'm quite aware that there is not that much difference in terms of climate, soil, and the landscape in this large area. So it's possible to have a village or even a ward, if not a district level, that can accommodate this idea of a botanical garden. And of course, I quite agree with you that not all botanical plants will accept this, but maybe, and we cannot, of course, pursue them to have everything in there, but at least what the locals consider are very, very endangered to disappear. Probably those ones are the ones we can start with, like those I showed you on the first slide. That particular tree, it has been harvested too much because it's probably the only one in a village. The only one in a village. That's you can see how it has been overworked, and so everyone is going there to ask for the bucks for the thing. Yeah, I take Javan's idea is a good idea actually, and back to your question, or rather reminder. Yes, due to this importance of a reliance of herbal medicines in Tanzania, we have the government actually streamlined it in the formal healthcare system. In Tanzania, at the National Hospital called the Muhimbili, there we have a section, an independent section actually attached to the university, but also to the university, hospital and the university. We call it Institute of Traditional Medicine. And this was established back in 1974 as a research unit, you can imagine, back in 1974. And in 1991, it was upgraded to become an institute. And along with this institute, in 2002, the government passed what we call the Traditional and Alternative Medicine Act. So we have even Traditional and Alternative Medicine Act passed by the Parliament. That was in 2002. And in 2005, Traditional and Alternative Health Practice Council, a council is there to take care of this. So today you will be told that with these conventional doctors, they will tell you that for this particular disease, we may not be able to cure you, probably go to the next window. Next is the institute I'm talking about. But then for us, I think, as I've said, there are several initiatives in place about this particular sector. But how do they approach it to promote it is probably different from the way we look at it. We take it from the heritage perspectives. For them, and I've tried to read quite a lot of this. I explored a lot of what they are doing there. For instance, the intangible aspect associated with the practices is not or are not mentioned, which we think they are very, very important, because you may come up with a good way of saving people, like the Botanical Garden we are talking about. As a scientist, we know the plant species, we know where to grow them, how do they, whatever. But without the intangible aspect attached to, for sure, we are going to miss. Our objective is going to fail. So that's how we approach this particular project. And actually what Raphael was talking about, the indigenous knowledge. These people, it's quite interesting. Even the way they harvest, they take a part of the plant for the medication is very interesting. They know which part you should take so that the plant does not disappear. Which route you should take so that the plant can continue existing and others can have the same access to. So this kind of knowledge, as Raphael said, I think are very important to be documented. Very important to be documented, and we think that it should be a holistic kind of approach. Plant, but also the associated beliefs, protocols, broadly called intangible cultural heritage as part of it. Otherwise, you leave the other won't survive. So again, it's eye-opener that we may need to research more and more to understand the meaning of this intangible associated to the practices, all the way from acquiring the material, processing the material, administration of the material is a different good project that we may need to think about.
Tom, thank you so much for that. We've run well over time, but I'm just conscious that maybe Raphael just very briefly might want to say that just as a way to make sure that you two and others and Nurdan and other people in the room and actually perhaps stay in touch, because obviously it's so important you continue this conversation and hopefully include me in it as well. So Raphael, I don't know if you want to say a couple of last things.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just very grateful for being part of this conversation. I'm really impressed by the whole project. Hopefully, we will keep in touch and talking more about this. I would have much more questions and problems to tie to your project. We definitely should keep in touch and exploring more of other possibilities. I mean, this thing that you just raised about the intangible and how it is lost in the documentation process, it's really huge and very interesting indeed. So yeah, so that's a huge thank you from my part.
Great. Okay, well, I think unless there's any other final words, just to thank you all very much for being here in this fantastic session, and we will have a recording of it, and as long as people are happy to have us put it up, we will put it up on a YouTube channel over the next few days, hopefully. And we look forward to continuing these discussions and maybe even going out and seeing some plants together with some of the knowledge holders in Tanzania, possibly in Central America and in Turkey, and seeing how we can think about a new way of approaching botanical gardens goes beyond colonial. So that is, I think, a very serious thing, and also something we could probably do or try to do within this project. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Could I, as Fairfusun, would we be able to have your contacts as well? Because we don't think we have those. And whoever, if you could put them in the chat, if you don't mind, or just email me or Liam, or maybe Nurdan could pass them on, that would be wonderful. I think everybody else probably have.
Yeah, I can pass.
And thank you, everybody. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Ciao, bye.
Thanks. Bye. And those of you who've just joined for the next session, we're having an MA orientation for the Imagining Futures Fellows. Just hang in there and we'll come back in a couple of minutes.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, look.
Well, all three from one screen.
Hello. This is the new gang. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, go
So I
on.
just wanted to give you a heads up that in 3 minutes, we will get load shedding, but then a generator will kick in. So we might be kicked off and then join up again.
Okay, nice to see you three. And we'll do proper introductions in a minute. Amer, lovely to see you again. Who's in here?
Hello.
Dodgy. Hello.
How are you? I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No,
talking.
that's fine.
Yes.
That was. So
Okay. How are you?
I'm good. Just give me just 2 minutes to get some water because we just had a 2-hour dialogue. So I'm a little bit, and it was amazing. And I'm glad some of you caught a bit of it, but just give me a sec. I'll be right back. But
Of
you
course,
can
take
chat
your
amongst
time.
yourselves if you want to open cameras. I'll be right back.
Of course, take your time.
Actually, let me stop recording. I've just realized the recording is still on.